It began on a cold and rainy Valentine's Day morning in 2000 in the quiet town of Shelby, North Carolina, a place not known for mystery or tragedy. The sort of town where neighbours wave, kids play outside until dark, and the local news usually covers high school sports and church events. In this southern stretch of Cleveland County, nestled between the mountains and the pine trees, a 9-year-old girl named Asha Degree left her home in the early hours before dawn. She stepped into the night with a small backpack and her heart full of something, maybe fear, maybe hope, and then she vanished. The Degree family lived on Oakcrest Drive, a modest street in a tightly knit community. Harold and Aquila Degree worked hard to give their children, Asha and her older brother O'Brien, a stable and loving home. Harold worked second shift at a local company, and Aquila was a hospital employee who left early each morning. They were a religious family, grounded in routine and discipline. There was nothing in their lives that hinted at chaos, nothing to suggest danger was lurking near. On the evening of February 13th, 2000, everything seemed normal. Asha and O'Brien came home from school, played basketball with neighbourhood kids, had dinner and watched television. At 8:30 p.m, the power went out across parts of the neighbourhood due to a car accident. The children were ushered to bed early. The lights returned around 9:00 p.m, and the family settled in for the night. Sometime between then and 2:30 a.m, when Harold checked on the kids before going to bed, Asha was still safely in her room. But by 6:30 a.m, when Aquila went to wake her for school, the little girl was gone. Her bed was empty, her room was undisturbed, her book bag, some clothes, and a few personal items were missing. At first, panic gave way to denial. Maybe she was hiding. Maybe she got up early and was somewhere nearby. But as the minutes passed and a search of the house and neighbourhood turned up nothing, the truth became inescapable. Asha had left, on her own, into the darkness and rain. Within hours, the Degree family contacted police. Authorities mobilised quickly. Asha was only 9 years old, a 4th grader at Falston Elementary, and it made no sense that she would run away. She had no known problems at home or at school. She wasn't the type of child who acted out or sought adventure without permission. Her disappearance sparked a wave of confusion and disbelief across Shelby. Hundreds of volunteers gathered to help search for her. Flyers were printed. Tips began to pour in. The community's sense of security crumbled beneath the weight of one haunting question. Why would a little girl disappear into the night? Then came the first reported sightings. Several motorists came forward saying they saw a young girl walking alone along Highway 18, a rural road several miles from Asha's home. Between 3:30 and 4:15 a.m, she was described as wearing a long-sleeved white shirt and white pants, walking southbound in the rain. It was unusual enough to catch their attention, and strange enough that one driver, a trucker, turned around and tried to approach her. He said the girl ran off the road and into the woods when he got close, as if frightened. It was a chilling image, a 9-year-old in the rain on a desolate road before dawn, vanishing into the trees. For investigators, this confirmed what they feared. Asha had indeed left on her own volition, but that only deepened the mystery. Why would a child with no history of running away sneak out in the middle of the night? What was she running from or to? Her parents were adamant. Asha was not the kind of child who would do this. She was sheltered, carefully raised, not allowed to watch violent television or roam the neighbourhood unsupervised. She was a good student, quiet and respectful, with a bright smile and a shy demeanour. She carried no visible scars of abuse, neglect or trauma. Her teachers spoke highly of her. Her classmates described her as kind, if a little reserved. There were no behavioural red flags, no strange adults in her life, no signs that she was groomed or manipulated. But children can carry secrets, even in the safest homes. Days turned into weeks. The FBI joined the case. Dogs searched the woods, helicopters scanned from above, and volunteers combed the area in expanding circles. The Degrees clung to hope, churches held vigils. The search was relentless. Then, about a week after her disappearance, a critical clue surfaced. A construction worker found items in a nearby shed off Highway 18, about the same area where the truck driver had seen Asha dart into the woods. Inside the shed were candy wrappers, a pencil, a marker, and a Mickey Mouse-shaped hairbow, later confirmed by Aquila as belonging to Asha. It appeared that she had taken shelter there, at least temporarily. But there was no sign of where she went next. And then the case went cold. Despite the extensive search and massive media coverage, leads dwindled. No one came forward with new sightings, No suspects were named, no motives were clear. It was as if Asha had simply vanished into thin air, leaving behind a trail of confusion and heartbreak. Years passed. Each anniversary brought renewed attention, but no answers. Her face appeared on billboards and in missing child databases. Her parents never stopped believing she was alive, never stopped searching. They kept her room the same, held on to her belongings, and maintained a hotline dedicated to finding her. Aquila once said, "I know she's out there, I can feel it. A mother knows." In 2004, 4 years after she vanished, a new clue emerged. Alongside a highway in Burke County, 2 miles north of Shelby, Asha's backpack was discovered. It was double wrapped in plastic bags and buried in the ground. Inside were some of her belongings, her house key, a New Kids on the Block t-shirt, and a copy of the children's book McElligot's Pool by Dr. Seuss. That particular book was noteworthy. It had been checked out from Asha's elementary school library, but no one could say when or by whom. The discovery was both a breakthrough and a heartbreak. It proved she had gone much farther than anyone originally believed, and someone had buried her things. But still, it didn't explain the why or the who. Was it someone she knew, someone she trusted, or a stranger who intercepted her journey? Even the fact that her backpack had been buried in plastic suggested premeditation, an attempt to hide evidence. But from whom? And for how long had it sat there, undetected? Theories began to swirl, some plausible, others disturbing. Did Asha plan her departure based on something she read or saw? Was she trying to meet someone? Had she become the target of a predator posing as a friend? Or was she running away from something she couldn't articulate, something no one knew was happening? The truth was painfully simple and terrifyingly complex. A child had walked into the dark, and the trail behind her faded before dawn. The discovery of Asha's backpack in 2004 should have brought investigators closer to answers. Instead, it only added layers of dread and uncertainty. The fact that it was found 26 miles away from where she was last seen, buried intentionally and protected by plastic bags, told detectives something chilling. Someone had taken the time to conceal it. This was no accident. Someone knew what happened to Asha Degree. Burke County wasn't exactly on the radar in the early stages of the search. When the backpack surfaced there, it radically expanded the possible timeline and geography of Asha's disappearance. Could she have walked that far? Not likely. It would have taken hours, even under ideal conditions, and this was a rainy, cold February night. More likely she'd been transported by someone, willingly or otherwise. But who? And when? And why? The backpack was sent to the FBI for forensic analysis. Every fibre, thread and object inside was examined. DNA testing, fingerprint analysis, chemical residue scans. They searched for anything that could identify who had handled it, or whether Asha had been in contact with others. But nothing yielded the breakthrough they needed. No DNA outside of Asha's, no fingerprints. The plastic bags themselves weren't traceable. It was as if whoever buried it knew exactly what they were doing. The book found inside McElligot's Pool was one of the most disturbing details. According to the Cleveland County School District, that copy had been checked out from Asha's school library, but not by her. The checkout card was missing, and the school couldn't confirm how she got it. Had someone given it to her? Had she taken it on her own? Had someone else in possession of the book crossed paths with her? It was a small clue, but in a case like this, even a children's book could hold weight. It raised the possibility that someone had gained Asha's trust through stories, through gifts, through subtle grooming. Despite renewed interest following the discovery, the investigation eventually slowed again. Years passed. The Degree family never stopped searching. They never stopped hoping. Aquila and Harold became tireless advocates, appearing on television, meeting with law enforcement, attending every yearly vigil without fail. Their lives were permanently split into before and after, each passing year stretching that division further apart. And yet the hope never left them entirely. One of the cruelest realities of long-term missing persons cases is that they often become paper-thin in the public mind, diluted by time, overtaken by newer tragedies, blurred by the sheer volume of the forgotten. But Asha's story stayed alive because of her family's determination. She was not forgotten. She would not be a statistic. In 2015, the FBI and the Cleveland County Sheriff's Office launched a renewed task force to re-examine Asha's case. Advances in forensic science and digital databases had opened doors that hadn't existed in 2000. They began re-interviewing witnesses, re-evaluating old evidence and reaching out publicly again. That same year, the National Centre for Missing and Exploited Children released an updated age progression image of Asha, what she might look like at 24. The picture showed a young woman with her same deep brown eyes, her soft, intelligent expression aged by time, imagining who she could have become. Then in 2016, investigators revealed that they had received a tip about a possible sighting. A man had come forward, saying he believed he saw a young girl entering a dark green 1970s model Lincoln Continental or Ford Thunderbird on the morning of Asha's disappearance. This tip came 16 years after the fact, and while the detail was compelling, it was impossible to confirm. Still, it raised another disturbing possibility, that Asha hadn't been alone for long, that someone had picked her up, that she had gotten into a car willingly, or under duress, with someone who meant her harm. The colour and model of the car were distinctive. Investigators canvassed records, cross-referenced vehicle registrations, and ran down tips involving old green sedans. But nothing definitive came of it. The clue lingered, frustrating, incomplete. Then came 2020. On the 20th anniversary of Asha's disappearance, the FBI increased the reward for information leading to the arrest and conviction of those responsible. It now stood at $45,000. Still, no arrests, no suspects named, no confession, no tree. That same year, a new tip came in, one that pointed to two men who had allegedly claimed to know what happened to Asha. According to a statement given to the police, these men, one of whom was already serving time in prison, had mentioned Asha's name years earlier, hinting that she had been killed and that they knew where her body was. Law enforcement searched the location they were directed to, a spot in a nearby field, but found nothing. The lead went cold. These bursts of activity kept the case alive, but for every one step forward, there were two that led to nowhere. The Degree family, meanwhile, continued to live with the unthinkable, the loss of their daughter without the dignity of truth. No body, no answer, just a memory and a wound that time refused to close. Asha's room remained untouched for years. Her Barbie dolls still lined the shelves. Her books were stacked as she left them. A picture of her in a white church dress with ribbons in her hair sat framed on the dresser. Her mother once said, "I've learned how to function without her, but I haven't learned how to live without her." And in the background of it all, the media attention, the vigils, the police files and posters, there was the child herself. A shy little girl who was afraid of dogs, who loved basketball, who always did her homework, who rarely spoke unless spoken to. A girl who had never even spent a night away from home on her own, who clung to her routine and family. And yet, on February 14th, 2000, she walked out into the darkness with a packed bag. One theory, shared quietly among investigators, was that Asha had been influenced by something, perhaps a story she read, a conversation she had, a promise someone made, something that convinced her she had a reason to leave, something that convinced her she would be safe. Other theories were darker, that she had been targeted, that she had been groomed over time by someone who knew how to avoid detection, that she had been led, not lured, away from her family, that she had been part of a plan far more sinister than a simple runaway case. But without evidence, every theory remained just that, a possibility. And in the vacuum of certainty, the Degree family lived in suspended grief, never able to mourn, never able to move forward. There is a line that families of the missing often say, "Not knowing is the worst part." With death, there is grief. With life, there is hope. But in between, there is an ache that never settles, a question that repeats itself endlessly. Where is she? What happened? The only certainty was that something unimaginable happened on that cold, wet Valentine's morning in 2000. A little girl left her bed, walked out the door, and became a question that still echoes a quarter-century later. The longer a person remains missing, the more fragile the threads of truth become. Witness memories fade, physical evidence deteriorates, and the facts become clouded with speculation. Yet with Asha Degree's case, there remains a stark clarity in the original mystery. A clarity that feels almost unnatural because of how little it aligns with what we expect. Children don't disappear like this, not from homes like hers, not in the dead of night with a packed bag and no clear reason, and not without leaving even a whisper of what went wrong. What makes Asha's case stand apart is how deeply unsettling it remains even after so many years. Not because it is filled with obvious violence or clear villainy, but because of how subtle and quiet the story is. There's no clear break-in, no scream in the night, no ransom note or trail of discarded items. Her disappearance was almost surgical, clean, silent, and nearly without trace. It's that silence that screams the loudest. One area that has remained a source of tension among investigators and armchair sleuths alike is the question of intent. Did Asha intend to run away for good? Or was this a child's version of going somewhere, a momentary decision that spiraled into tragedy? To answer that, investigators returned over and over again to her psychology. Asha was described as emotionally young for her age, responsible, yes, but sheltered. She was very much still a child in mindset, careful and rule-abiding, sometimes afraid to make even small mistakes. Her world was small and safe. That's what made her disappearance so confounding. Running away, even in the classic rebellious sense, didn't fit. And yet, she took the time to pack a bag, sneak past her sleeping family and walk into the night. Her family described her as afraid of the dark. They also said she had never walked alone outside past their front yard. How could such a child summon the courage to walk more than a mile down a highway in the rain before dawn? The answer might lie in a potent mix of childlike determination and misunderstanding, or something more sinister. There is one theory, persistent and quietly haunting, that Asha had been communicating with someone in secret, perhaps someone posing as a friend. It could have been a person she met at school, at church, or even someone she encountered through books or letters. In 2000, social media was not a factor, but letters and in-person grooming were possibilities. This hypothetical person could have promised her something, a new life, an adventure, even just the opportunity to meet a beloved celebrity or sports figure. If so, they did it carefully. There were no notes, no letters found, no online trail. But the idea remains. What if Asha wasn't running away from something, but towards someone? Investigators explored these possibilities. They looked into local sex offenders. They questioned teachers and school staff. They even looked into classmates' families. But nothing stuck. No one in her life stood out. No inappropriate relationships were ever uncovered. There were no warning signs, at least none that anyone noticed at the time. Still, it's possible Asha internalized something, a fear, a burden, or even a secret that she didn't feel safe enough to share. Kids often carry their worlds quietly. They try to make sense of complicated feelings with simple solutions. If she believed someone needed her, or that she was solving a problem by leaving, it might explain why she left so willingly, despite the fear and the dark. But that theory only carries so far, because it doesn't explain what happened next, or who she may have encountered after stepping off the roadside and into the trees. The Mickey Mouse hairbow and the candy wrappers found in the nearby shed offered the strongest indication of her path that night. They suggest she took shelter, maybe briefly, maybe longer, and was still alive after leaving home. What happened after that moment is the black void at the heart of this story. There's another disturbing pattern that began to surface in the background, a statistical ghost that investigators never publicly connected to Asha, but which lingers just the same. The southeastern US, including North Carolina, has long carried a disproportionate number of missing black children who receive minimal media attention. Asha's case stands out because it did receive a measure of coverage, but even so, the intensity of national media was never comparable to similar cases involving white children. This is part of a broader phenomenon some call missing white woman syndrome, the reality that missing persons of colour, particularly girls, are often underreported and underinvestigated. The Degree family was aware of this. They spoke about it delicately but honestly. If it had been a little white girl, a killer once said in an interview, it would have been all over the world by now. Their grief was amplified not just by the loss, but by the quietness of the response from the outside world. While their church and community rallied around them, the media did not always follow. Still, they kept pushing. Every February 14th, they held a walk in Asha's honour. They called it the Walk for Asha, a 10-mile march ending near where she was last seen on Highway 18. It was both a tribute and a reminder that Asha had not been forgotten, not by them, and not by those who cared enough to walk in her memory. With each passing year, the search became more digital. Databases of missing children became more robust. Tip lines were monitored more efficiently, but still, the story remained frozen, its puzzle unsolved. And then, in a chilling echo of the past, investigators began to re-examine a small collection of cases involving other missing children in North Carolina during the late 90s and early 2000s. Nothing matched Asha's exactly, but certain elements were disturbingly familiar. Sudden disappearances in the early morning hours, children who had been seemingly groomed or misled, strange vehicle sightings with no follow-up. The cases didn't fit perfectly, but they painted a haunting picture. Perhaps Asha's disappearance was not an isolated incident, but part of a darker pattern that no one had seen clearly at the time. If true, it would mean there might be someone out there who had done this before. Someone who knew how to isolate a child, how to manipulate them into trusting, how to vanish them without a trace. That possibility, however remote, added urgency to the case once again. In the wake of these discoveries, the FBI reaffirmed its commitment to solving Asha's case. They released updated sketches of the green car seen in the 2000 tip. They reissued appeals to the public, encouraging anyone, no matter how minor their recollection, to come forward. They emphasized that someone knew something. Someone, somewhere, had seen or heard the wrong thing at the right time. To this day, the Cleveland County Sheriff's Office keeps a box of case files marked Asha Degree. Inside are hundreds of pages, interviews, photographs, tip line calls and forensic reports. Some are decades old, others just months. Each piece is a fragment of a story that still refuses to end. And at the center of that story is a little girl in white pajamas, carrying a backpack too big for her small frame, walking down a dark road in the early hours of Valentine's Day, heading into a mystery that has kept her name alive long after the trail went cold. There is something uniquely haunting about a child who simply disappears. Not just taken, not just missing, but vanished, leaving behind no final sound, no clear path, no last goodbye. In the case of Asha Degree, every piece of the story seems to contradict the others. A girl too shy to leave her yard walked a mile down a highway. A girl afraid of the dark stepped into a storm. A girl with no reason to run packed her things and vanished before dawn. The contradictions don't cancel each other out, they deepen the enigma. The closer you look, the less it makes sense. And perhaps that is why the story still pulls people in 25 years later. By the mid-2010s, as the case approached its second decade of unsolved status, a new generation of internet users began to discover it. True crime podcasts featured Asha's name, Reddit threads debated timelines and theories, YouTube documentaries analysed every inch of the case, slowing down what little surveillance footage existed from that night, revisiting terrain maps of Highway 18, poring over FBI statements and inconsistencies. What surfaced from these digital autopsies wasn't revelation, but realisation. The eerie, growing awareness that the only person who could truly explain what happened was Asha herself. And she had been silent for decades. Still, the work continued. The FBI established a formal page for Asha's case, listing her as endangered and missing, offering detailed information, forensic sketches, and age progression images. Local police coordinated with federal agencies. They interviewed former classmates and teachers again. They dug into background checks on anyone who lived along Highway 18 during that time. No stone was left unturned, and yet the field remained empty. In 2021, the community of Shelby came together once again for what had become an annual ritual. The Degree family, surrounded by supporters, walked that same 10-mile route. Signs with Asha's name fluttered in the cold wind. Asha's face, still 9 years old, frozen in time, stared out from posters, shirts, buttons. The moment was somber, but not hopeless. It was defiant. Her parents were not giving up. That same year, investigators quietly re-examined one of the lesser-known details from the early case files. The accounts of Asha packing her bag. Several items she took, personal clothes, her favourite backpack, school supplies, seemed to indicate some planning. But there were strange absences too. She didn't bring a coat despite the weather. She brought a book that no one could confirm she'd ever checked out. She didn't bring her favourite toy or any money. And yet she locked the door behind her when she left, suggesting she didn't expect to return quickly, but perhaps also that she wasn't being chased. What kind of 9-year-old makes that kind of decision? There are only two widely supported possibilities. Either Asha left on her own volition, based on some internal reasoning no adult had detected, or someone convinced her to leave. Perhaps not at the door, perhaps not at the moment of her vanishing, but long before. Grooming doesn't always take the form we expect. It doesn't have to come from strangers. It can come from subtle manipulation, a friendly voice, the promise of something just around the corner. The detail that often chills people most is that sighting, the truck driver who saw her walking alone along Highway 18 at around 4 a.m., it is an image that has become central to the mystery, almost cinematic in its loneliness. A little girl in white trudging down a dark road in a rainstorm as headlights catch her in a flash. He turned around, tried to help, but she bolted into the woods, and then nothing. That moment, her sudden dash into the trees, has inspired endless speculation. Was she afraid of being recognised? Was she told not to talk to anyone? Was she running to a specific location? Or had something already gone wrong? The shed where her belongings were later found was nearby. It likely served as a temporary hiding place. But she didn't stay there. That decision too remains unexplained. Years later, investigators noted something deeply disturbing. The fact that the backpack was double-wrapped and buried didn't just suggest concealment. It suggested someone wanted it protected, perhaps in case they ever wanted to retrieve it. That raises questions about the timeline. Did something happen to Asha right away? Or was she with someone for some time before her trail disappeared? It's the kind of question that creates emotional whiplash for her family. If she was with someone for days or weeks, did she suffer? Was she cared for? Did she cry out for home? Was there a chance to save her, one that passed unnoticed? In the years that followed, there were rumours, unsubstantiated claims of sightings, tips that led nowhere. One tip described a girl who looked like Asha spotted in Atlanta, but no evidence ever supported it. Another came from a woman who claimed her ex-boyfriend confessed to something related to Asha while drunk, but the man denied it and nothing could be proven. The tip about the two incarcerated men who allegedly knew what happened was among the most serious. But when law enforcement searched the location where they claimed Asha might be buried, nothing turned up. The Degree family was not surprised. They had grown used to leads that turned into dead ends. Still, each one carried a terrible weight. For every false tip, they had to confront the possibility, the flash of hope, followed by the plunge back into uncertainty. It became a rhythm of pain. And yet, despite the passage of time, despite the grief and doubt, they never once stopped believing Asha could still be alive. "Until someone shows me otherwise," Harold once said, "I will always believe my daughter is out there." Hope can be a stubborn thing. It clings to the smallest evidence, the faintest signs. Asha's room, for many years, remained untouched. The Degrees refused to create a shrine. They didn't want to bury her before they knew, but they preserved her memory in everyday ways. Her picture remained by the front door. Her name was spoken regularly. Her absence was never allowed to become normal. One especially painful part of the journey was watching other children grow up. O'Brien, Asha's older brother, had to live in the shadow of her absence, the protective older sibling who had no idea that the last time he saw his sister would be the last. The Degrees did their best to create a normal life, but there was no normal anymore. Every birthday, every holiday was haunted by a missing seat, a missing laugh, a missing child. Sometimes, Aquila said, she would hear a child's voice in the store and whip her head around, just in case. She knew it wasn't Asha. She knew her child wouldn't look the same anymore. But the brain doesn't always listen to reason. Grief lives in reflexes. The Degrees also became deeply aware of the way time reshapes memory. They feared that the world would forget her, that the next generation wouldn't know her name. That was why they continued the annual walk, why they talked to reporters, why they kept her story alive. Asha Degree wasn't just their daughter. She was a symbol of something larger, the way children can vanish without cause, and how that vanishing reshapes everyone left behind. She became part of the lexicon of missing children. But to her parents, she was still the girl who loved to read, who adored the colour green, who carried a basketball everywhere, even when wearing a dress. She was still their daughter, frozen in time, waiting for someone to bring her home. As the 2020s progressed, a strange tension began to settle over Asha Degree's case. A feeling familiar to those who followed other long unsolved disappearances. It is the weight of years layered over silence. A story that refuses to resolve itself, even when the timeline stretches well beyond the reasonable window for answers. Yet somehow, despite the silence, the story never fades entirely. It lingers, not because of drama or spectacle, but because of the deeply human feeling that something is still unfinished. In Shelby, North Carolina, the town where Asha once lived, reminders of her still exist in quiet ways. Her face remains on bulletin boards in local stores. Teachers still mention her name when training new staff. Police officers who were young when she vanished have now risen to higher ranks, some of them still working the case, refusing to let it go cold entirely. And every year on Valentine's Day, someone places flowers near the place she was last seen. Asha would be in her 30s now. The age progression images show a young woman with poised features, dark eyes filled with curiosity and sadness. Those images are speculative, created with forensic artistry and data from family features, but they stir something visceral in those who see them. They bridge the gap between the child frozen in time and the adult she never got the chance to become. But the truth is, we don't know where she is, or even what became of her, and that absence, more than any theory, drives the story forward. Over the years, FBI profilers worked quietly behind the scenes, trying to construct a behavioural model for what kind of person might have lured Asha from her home, if she was lured at all. One possible profile emerged: someone intelligent, patient, non-threatening, someone local, someone who would have known how to build trust slowly, who might have presented themselves as a peer or caretaker. Not a violent snatch and grab offender, but a manipulator, a planner. This theory was never publicly confirmed, but privately some investigators believed it made the most sense. The way Asha left, with intention, with belongings, with a destination assigned, suggested influence. But if that's true, then the greatest question becomes, who had access to her world without raising suspicion? The answer may lie not in the night she disappeared, but in the weeks or months before. In cases of long-term grooming, perpetrators often plant ideas subtly. They offer stories that resonate. They mimic parental roles. They exploit gaps, brief absences, overlooked moments, or small opportunities, and they do it slowly, so that by the time the child makes a decision, it feels like their own. That concept haunted Asha Degree more than any other. The idea that someone may have inserted themselves into her daughter's life, not by force but by deceit. "You try to protect your kids from the world," she once said, "but sometimes the danger doesn't knock, it whispers." It's important to understand that Asha's disappearance isn't just a mystery, it's a wound. One that cuts through not only her family but her town and through anyone who's ever loved a child. Her case became symbolic of something larger, how even the most protected children can slip through cracks no one knew were there. The quietness of Asha's vanishing, the lack of noise, the absence of a scream, is what keeps people up at night. If someone had broken into the house, left a window shattered, or if a neighbour had heard yelling, it would point to violence. But what happened was quieter, and in many ways more terrifying. She left on her own, and that leads to one of the most disturbing and least discussed possibilities, that someone convinced her to leave, and then took her life, that her body even now remains somewhere undiscovered. North Carolina's rural expanse is vast. Thousands of wooded acres, old wells, private land, unsearched creeks, and places where a small body could go unseen for decades. The idea is unbearable, but it is one the Degrees have had to live with every day since February 14th, 2000. And yet, and this is the paradox, they have never believed she is gone. Not truly. Every public statement made by Asha's parents has carried a thread of stubborn hope. It's not naive. It's not born from denial. It is something deeper, a belief rooted in love, in connection, in a refusal to let her story be defined by tragedy alone. They have always said, "We believe she is out there, somewhere." Forensic experts say that in rare cases, kidnapped children who are not immediately harmed are kept hidden, sometimes for years, in isolated or abusive environments. Sometimes they are led to believe their families have abandoned them. Sometimes they are renamed. In these heartbreaking scenarios, the victim doesn't even realize they're missing until adulthood, if ever. Is it possible Asha is one of them? The chances are infinitesimally small, but not zero. There have been stories. Elizabeth Smart abducted from her home and held for 9 months. J.C. Dugard kidnapped at 11 and held for 18 years before being discovered. These are extraordinary cases, but they are proof that survival is possible, even in the darkest circumstances. That possibility is what keeps the Degrees going. Over the years, the family has worked with non-profit organisations, partnered with missing persons advocates, and maintained a small but active online presence to keep Asha's name alive. They have received hundreds of messages, some helpful, some cruel, some simply wanting to offer prayers, and they have read every one. Into 2, the FBI quietly reassessed its handling of the case and brought in a new team of analysts to review all digital and physical evidence. Asha's backpack was retested using modern DNA techniques, including methods that weren't available 2 decades earlier. Genetic genealogy, the same tool that helped solve the Golden State Killer case, was considered. But again, no matches. The bag, for all its heartbreak, remained mute. Yet investigators held on to one core belief. Someone out there knows the truth. Maybe it's a man who once lived along Highway 18, now old and living in quiet guilt. Maybe it's someone who heard a story in prison and never reported it. Maybe it's a woman who saw a child in a green car and still wonders if she should have said something. The story waits for that person. What makes Asha's case especially painful is how easily it could have gone unnoticed. If not for the truck driver's sighting, no one would have known she walked down that road. If not for the shed, no one would know she made it that far. If not for the backpack, there'd be no proof she ever left Shelby at all. These fragments are what keep the story alive. Each one is a thread. Fragile, yes, but threads can connect. If someone pulls hard enough, the whole mystery might finally unravel. For now, Asha remains missing. Not declared dead. Not forgotten. Just missing. And missing is a word that leaves the door open to pain, yes, but also to possibility. Somewhere in the spaces between memory and mystery, Asha Degree still lingers. Not just in the records of law enforcement or the hearts of her grieving family, but in the public imagination. Her story has become a symbol for every unanswered question, every child who stepped out of frame and was never seen again. And yet, unlike most missing child cases, there is no crime scene, no smoking gun, no final moment that gives shape to the horror. Just footprints in the fog, just the unbearable quiet of a question that has never been answered. As the investigation stretched into its 3rd decade, more people began returning to the basics, not out of futility, but out of necessity. If every lead had gone cold, perhaps the answers had always been buried in what little was already known. One such detail is often overlooked, but it may be more important than it seems: the weather. On the night Asha disappeared, the region was hit by a sudden storm. Rain pounded the streets. Temperatures hovered in the low 40s. There were no streetlights on the stretch of Highway 18 where she was last seen. For a child afraid of the dark, it's hard to comprehend what might drive her to walk that road alone, soaked and shivering long after midnight. The very idea defies everything we know about her. And yet, she did. What if some have asked she wasn't walking away from something at all, but towards something? What if she believed she had an appointment, a mission, a meeting? One theory suggested that Asha had misunderstood something, perhaps a television program or a story, and believed she had to go somewhere on that specific night, maybe to help someone. Children, after all, don't always process information the way adults do. A fairy tale or a half-remembered anecdote can become a call to action. If someone encouraged her to believe she had a secret task or destiny, she might have obeyed. It sounds fantastical, even implausible, until you remember how many stories children consume that blend the real and the magical. And if someone malicious was involved, someone who knew how to speak that language, how to guide a child's sense of loyalty or wonder, then it becomes less fantasy and more strategy. Others believe she may have been attempting to run away in the way a child imagines it, a temporary escape, a dramatic gesture, not a permanent disappearance. This theory, though, raises painful questions. What would make a child like Asha, in a loving and structured home, want to leave, even briefly? Some have pointed to the date, February 14th, Valentine's Day, and speculated whether it carried meaning for her, or whether something happened at school that triggered her decision. Her mother has said Asha was upset after fouling out during a basketball game the day before she disappeared, crying in frustration, but this seemed more like ordinary child disappointment than anything serious. Still, for a sensitive child like Asha, emotions could run deep. Was that moment part of a larger internal struggle, or just one of many small stresses that added up? A detail that continues to nag at those who study the case is the lack of digital footprints. Today, even children have phones, apps, text messages, but in 2000, Asha had none of that. There was no way to track her movements, no cloud storage of chats or emails. If someone was communicating with her, they did it in person or through old-fashioned means, notes, spoken words, or books. Which brings us back to McElligot's Pool, the Dr. Seuss book found in her bag, A copy from the school library, but not one she had checked out. Its message, one of infinite possibility, of casting a line into strange waters and believing something amazing might happen. In the story, a boy imagines all the incredible creatures he might catch, despite being told by adults that the pool is empty. It's whimsical, fantastical, and quietly eerie when found among the few possessions of a missing girl. What if that book wasn't just a coincidence? What if it was given to her by someone who wanted her to believe in something beyond her ordinary life? What if it was used as part of a fantasy, a lie, or even a trap? The deeper you go into this case, the more you realize how fragile the known facts are. There's no closure, just corners, half glimpses, and moments that stop just short of revealing the full picture. In 2003, as the case approached its 24th year, a retired investigator involved in the original search spoke anonymously to a local journalist. He said, "I've worked murder cases, cold cases, serial offenders, but this one feels like a thread that got cut too early, like the story never got to finish. We were always just one day late." That feeling is echoed by many in law enforcement who've touched the case over the years, a collective sense of proximity, of almost reaching her. The shed, the backpack, the witness sightings, it's all close, but close isn't enough. Technology has advanced dramatically since 2000. DNA matching now uses family trees and ancestry databases. AI systems analyze voice inflection in 911 calls. Facial recognition can track people through grainy old footage. But none of these tools have broken Asha's silence. Her case remains one of the most stubborn mysteries in the history of missing children in America. And that silence has left space for stories. In Shelby and beyond, people whisper their theories. Some believe she was taken by someone she trusted. Others think she fell victim to a chance predator, someone passing through who spotted her on the roadside and acted in the moment. Others wonder if she was the victim of a trafficking scheme, though no evidence supports this. All of these possibilities float above the case like fog, present, but shapeless. What remains sharp is her family's pain and their clarity. Asha's parents have never claimed to have answers, but they have never stopped insisting that she is worth looking for, that no case should grow cold just because the years have stacked up, that a child who walked into the dark should not be abandoned by the light. That's why they still speak her name, why they still sit for interviews, even when it hurts, why they still walk those 10 miles every year, tracing the road she took, the one that swallowed her, because they believe she didn't vanish. She was taken, or lost, or misled, but not forgotten. To them, she is not a ghost. She is still out there somewhere, waiting for the right person to say the right thing, to remember a moment, to come forward. It would take only one truth, one confession, one accident of memory to break the silence. And when that day comes, if it comes, it won't just be a headline. It will be a reckoning for every year lost, for every lie protected, for every child who was quietly erased. Until then, the story of Asha Degree continues, not as a closed case or a cautionary tale, but as an open wound in the shape of a missing girl. Some stories end abruptly, with a moment of clarity, a confession, or a discovery. Others stretch endlessly into the unknown, expanding with every passing year into a painful limbo. Asha Degree's story is the latter, a story suspended in time, not for lack of trying, but because the pieces never quite fit together. After a quarter of a century, she remains missing. Her backpack remains the last tangible proof of her existence on that night. And the world, despite all its advances, is still asking the same question: what happened to Asha? By 2005, nearly every investigative tool available had been applied to her case at least once. The FBI had reopened the investigation multiple times, each with renewed hope that modern forensics might succeed where earlier methods had failed. Her DNA was entered into every relevant database. Forensic genealogists, those modern miracle workers who had cracked decades-old cold cases, attempted comparisons with distant relatives. Nothing. But silence, as it turns out, isn't absence. It's not forgetting. And in Asha's case, it became a quiet, persistent form of resistance. A new generation of internet sleuths emerged. People who had not been born when Asha disappeared, but who grew up with true crime as a genre, who viewed the unresolved as a challenge. Subreddits devoted to cold cases revisited her timeline. Podcasts aired episodes that reached millions. TikTok creators summarized her case in 1-minute clips that went viral. The power of these platforms brought Asha's story into fresh light. People who had never heard of her now knew her face, her name, the way her parents still held on to hope. And from that wave of awareness came new questions, new eyes on the map, new breakdowns of old witness accounts. An entire community of digital detectives began asking, what if we missed something? Some focused on the geography. The terrain along Highway 18 had changed in the years since her disappearance. What had once been thick woods and farmland was now scattered with new developments. One group used satellite images from the US Geological Survey archives to compare tree lines from 2000 to now, identifying possible sites where evidence might still be hiddenness beneath the roots and brush. They proposed small-scale searches coordinated with local volunteers. Some of these efforts were granted permission, others were declined. But the persistence of strangers was quietly remarkable. Others began combing through old local news archives, letters to the editor, police blotters, arrest records, school board notes, looking not for obvious connections but for subtle ones, names that appeared more than once, unusual incidents near the date of her disappearance, patterns in community reports. These amateur researchers uncovered inconsistencies in timelines and previously unreported minor arrests near the area of the shed. Nothing rose to the level of a smoking gun, but a picture began to form of a community that had perhaps held more shadows than anyone knew at the time. It wasn't that Shelby was unsafe, but like any town, it had its hidden corners, its unspoken secrets, and the more people looked, the more it became clear that someone must know something. Perhaps it wasn't a dramatic kidnapping by a stranger in a van. Perhaps it was someone local, someone trusted, someone quiet, the kind of person no one would suspect, but who knew exactly how to gain a child's trust. That idea, repeated over and over, has become a painful refrain in cases like Asha's. Not all predators look like monsters. Some look like neighbours, teachers, volunteers, coaches, and if one of them spoke gently, made promises, fed her imagination, the story starts to make a certain terrible sense. But even with these possibilities, no name has ever been conclusively tied to Asha's disappearance. One moment in particular began gaining renewed attention, a reported sighting of a green in 70s model Lincoln Continental or Ford Thunderbird with rust spots and white-wall tyres seen along the road near the time Asha vanished. Two separate witnesses came forward describing the car. Decades later, people still ask, who was driving it? Was it coincidence, or was that vehicle central to the entire case? The FBI had released an appeal for anyone with information about the vehicle. It remains one of the only specific leads ever made public. But after all these years, no one has come forward to claim it. Not the driver, not a neighbour who remembered seeing it parked on their street. Nothing. And so the green car, like so many other pieces of this puzzle, remains suspended in uncertainty. In 2024, a documentary team from Europe travelled to Shelby to film a segment on the phenomenon of missing children, whose cases receive less media attention. Asha's was their centrepiece. They interviewed her parents, local police and national advocates. One moment from that film stood out, a scene where Asha Degree sits in a small room holding a photograph of her daughter. The interviewer asks her, "Do you think people have forgotten her?" She doesn't answer immediately. She looks at the photo, then she says, "Not everyone, not the right people, and that's what matters." Hope, after so many years, is a complicated thing. It's not just about the belief that Asha is alive, it's about the belief that truth still exists, that somewhere, in someone's memory or conscience or garage or journal, there is a clue, something simple, something small, something that could crack this story open. The Degree family has always asked for the same thing, that people not forget, that they keep looking, keep talking, that they treat Asha not as a ghost story but as a real child, now a grown woman, whose life matters as much today as it did when she was 9 years old. For them, time has changed nothing. They still hold her room in their hearts. They still picture her laugh, her walk, the way she hugged. They still imagine her returning. They imagine what she would say, where she's been, who she is now. And in the absence of proof, they believe. The last few years have also seen a shift in how we talk about these stories. There's been a growing recognition that black and brown children are too often overlooked, that the media coverage, the search resources, the urgency, it isn't evenly distributed. Asha's case stands at the intersection of those failures. It's not just a tragedy, it's a reminder of the biases we bring to who is considered missing enough, who is grieved publicly, who is fought for. In that way, Asha's story is part of something much larger. It is the story of a country struggling to see all its children equally, the story of a family who refused to be silent, and the story of a little girl who walked out into the dark and who we are still waiting to bring home. There's a photo, one of the last taken of Asha, where she's sitting on a couch, legs tucked under her, a quiet smile on her face. Her eyes are bright, focused on something just out of frame. It's an ordinary moment captured before the world changed, but when people look at it now, they see something else. They see a child worth remembering. They see a promise left unkept. They see the question that won't go away. What happened to Asha Degree? Asha's name now echoes in the world of the missing, like a whispered riddle, unanswered, unresolved, unforgettable. Her face, frozen in time, has stared back from missing persons posters for 25 years. She has become more than a photo on a flyer, more than a bullet point in cold case databases. She has become a symbol of the children who vanish without reason, of the families who refuse to surrender, and of the maddening silence that sometimes follows tragedy. And yet behind that symbolism, she is still just Asha, a little girl who loved candy and cartoons, who kept her basketball close even in a dress, who giggled shyly when people praised her good grades, who one cold February night in 2000 left the only world she had ever known and didn't come back. The world keeps moving, but some stories stay right where they were left. Investigators continue to revisit the case periodically. Technology has brought new tools to the table, but it has not brought closure. The backpack remains in FBI custody, preserved like a relic, a small nylon time capsule of who Asha was. Her clothes, the book, the personal items, each one meticulously logged, catalogued, and examined with each new wave of forensic advancement. But there's nothing in the fibres, no secret stashed in the seams. What the backpack does reveal is the care with which it was hidden. Found nearly 2 years after Asha's disappearance, buried in plastic bags along a rural construction site off Highway 18, it speaks volumes about intent. Someone wanted it protected, concealed, possibly returned to later, but why? And by whom? That moment, the discovery of the backpack, is often seen as the case's last major turning point. But it was over 20 years ago, and no forensic lead has come of it since. Still, her parents refuse to view the backpack as an endpoint. To them, it is a thread, a trail, broken though it may be. She got that far, a killer once said, so we know she made it somewhere. It's this kind of thinking that has defined their approach. Where others might see defeat, the Degrees insist on possibility. Because the opposite of hope isn't despair, it's forgetting, and they refuse to forget. What makes Asha's case so deeply unsettling, even to seasoned investigators, is how tightly it was folded into a normal life. There was no history of abuse, no signs of distress, no recent upheaval in the family. No one had a vendetta, no custody battles, no messy divorce, no known predator in the neighbourhood. She wasn't even allowed to walk alone beyond her own block. Her life, by every measure, was protected. And yet, she left. The fact that she took her school bag and packed belongings suggests forethought. But the absence of warm clothing or food indicates that she may not have understood what she was walking into. She may have trusted someone to meet her, or she may have believed she was doing something brave, something good, something meaningful. We still don't know who planted that idea in her head, if anyone. And then there's the detail of her running into the woods when the driver stopped to help. This moment has haunted investigators for decades. It seems contradictory. She left her house voluntarily, calmly, yet when offered assistance she fled into darkness. What would cause a child to do that? Only a few possibilities make sense. One is that she'd been told not to speak to strangers, classic parental advice that perhaps kicked in instinctively when the trucker slowed down. Another possibility is far darker, that she was told someone would be following her, that if she spoke to anyone else there would be consequences. Maybe someone convinced her she was on a secret mission, or perhaps someone had frightened her into obedience long before that night. These theories are deeply unsettling but necessary to consider, because a child doesn't just vanish. Someone made her disappear. In recent years, a growing number of advocates have urged that the case be fully reopened, not just reviewed periodically, but reinvestigated from the ground up. That includes re-interviewing every teacher, coach, and volunteer who had access to Asha's school or after-school activities in the year before she disappeared. Some argue that the initial investigation may have missed something, not through incompetence, but through the assumption that this was a one-off event, a rare anomaly. But child exploitation, we now understand better than ever, is almost never random. Grooming happened slowly, in plain sight. And in 2000, we weren't talking about grooming the way we do now. We weren't asking how children learn to hide their fears. We didn't have the language for coercive control. And most importantly, we weren't always looking for predators in the spaces that felt safe. That shift in understanding is one of the most promising aspects of revisiting Asha's case today. It's not just about technology, it's about perspective, about seeing patterns we once overlooked, about understanding that danger doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers, and that whisper might still be out there, echoing in the mind of someone who saw something they dismissed. A coach, a janitor, a neighbour, a former student, someone who noticed something strange but said nothing. Or someone who was told something and convinced themselves it was a joke or a dream or not their business. The Degrees continue to believe that someone holds that final piece, that memory, that fact, that name. They aren't naive. They know what the statistics say. But they have seen children found years, even decades after being taken, and they have seen miracles. What they want, what they have always wanted, is not just closure. It's justice, and not punishment necessarily, but truth. They want to know what Asha saw when she left the house, who she thought she was going to meet, what she felt when she packed her bag, whether she was excited, scared, confused. They want to know if she was loved, if someone cared for her, if, in those first hours or days, she had hope. And most of all, they want to bring her home, to give her a grave if that's what's needed, to give her a welcome if by some miracle she is still out there, and to give themselves, finally, a reason to sleep without dreaming of footsteps in the rain. When we talk about Asha Degree, we talk about the mystery, the timeline, the clues, but that's not really what matters. What matters is the girl behind the case file, the child who loved the colour green, the daughter who danced in her church dress, the sister who shared a room and a laugh. What happened to Asha Degree? It's a question that still waits in the air, like a prayer not yet answered. And somewhere, maybe close, maybe far, someone knows the truth. The only question that remains is, when will they speak? In the years since Asha's disappearance, her story has become woven into the fabric of Shelby's identity, a haunting presence that refuses to fade. The town's collective memory holds her image, her smile, and the ache of unanswered questions. Yet amidst the sorrow and speculation, there is also a quiet resilience, a community galvanized to ensure that Asha's name will never be forgotten, and that her story will continue to be told. This spirit is evident every February 14th, the anniversary of her disappearance, when neighbours, volunteers and advocates come together to retrace the steps Asha might have taken. They walk the stretch of Highway 18, placing flowers and signs along the roadside, shining flashlights into the woods, and sharing stories of hope and loss. These gatherings are not just acts of remembrance, they are acts of defiance, declarations that even decades later the search is not over. The Degree family remains at the centre of this ongoing vigil. Aquila and Tim Degree, their faces lined with years of grief and hope, continue to speak publicly, advocating for missing children nationwide. Their tireless efforts have helped raise awareness of the disparities in how missing persons cases are handled, particularly for black children like Asha, whose cases historically received less media attention. Their advocacy has contributed to meaningful changes in law enforcement protocols, encouraging more inclusive and thorough investigations. They have partnered with organisations dedicated to improving the systems designed to find and protect vulnerable children, turning their personal tragedy into a beacon of hope for others. Meanwhile, law enforcement agencies, while cautious, acknowledge the power of community engagement in cold cases. The Shelby Police Department, in collaboration with the FBI, has established a task force to periodically review the case with fresh eyes. This task force includes not only seasoned detectives, but also experts in behavioural analysis, forensic technology, and child psychology. One of the task force's recent initiatives involves re-examining the psychological profile of potential suspects, individuals who had access to children in the area at the time and who displayed suspicious behaviour. The goal is not to cast blame indiscriminately, but to refine the investigation and potentially identify persons of interest who may have been overlooked. In addition, there is a growing recognition of the importance of listening to community memories. Stories once dismissed as rumours or inconsequential are being revisited with care. Asha's disappearance, while deeply personal, is also a community wound, and healing it requires collective remembrance. Beyond Shelby, Asha's case has resonated with a broader audience. True crime enthusiasts, missing persons advocates, and concerned citizens worldwide have contributed to online databases, shared her story on social media, and supported searches. This digital solidarity reflects a new kind of community, one connected not by geography, but by shared determination to find justice for the missing. Technological advances continue to offer hope. New DNA analysis methods can extract information from degraded samples that once yielded no results. Geographic profiling algorithms can suggest probable locations where a missing person might have gone based on known movements. AI-driven analysis of historical data can detect patterns humans might miss. Despite these tools, the most vital element remains human: the memories, the voices, the willingness to speak up. In cold cases like Asha's, it is often a small detail, recalled years later by someone who thought it was unimportant, that can break the silence. The story of Asha Degree is not just a narrative of loss, but a call to action. A reminder that every missing child matters, that every case deserves persistent attention, and that hope, even when fragile, is worth fighting for. As time stretches forward, the search continues. The questions remain unanswered, but the commitment endures. Asha Degree's footsteps may have faded into the night long ago, but her story still walks with us, a solemn, haunting echo, urging us to look closer, listen harder, and never stop searching. Because someday, somehow, the silence will break. And when it does, the world will finally know what happened to Asha. The passage of time can both erode memories and deepen mysteries. For Asha Degree, every year that slipped by without answers only magnified the questions, the whys and hows that haunted everyone who knew her, and those who came to know her story later. But with every unanswered question, the commitment to uncover the truth only strengthened. In 2015, a new chapter of hope opened when investigators revisited Asha's case with fresh technology and renewed urgency. DNA phenotyping, a process that uses genetic material to create physical profiles of unknown individuals, had started to reshape cold case investigations. Although no direct DNA evidence linked to a suspect had been found, analysts hoped to use environmental DNA from the backpack and other preserved evidence to identify possible persons of interest. The painstaking process took years. Samples were analysed, cross-referenced with national databases, and re-examined under microscopes more powerful than anything available in 2000. Yet the results were inconclusive. No new material, no unknown profiles emerged from the biological traces. While the forensic trail ran cold, other avenues grew warmer. In 2017, the Degrees partnered with a non-profit organisation dedicated to using modern technology and crowdsourced research to find missing persons. They invited volunteers worldwide to examine everything from maps and witness statements to archived news footage. One volunteer's meticulous timeline review revealed a subtle inconsistency. Several witnesses recalled a man in his late 40s who had been seen near the shed where the backpack was later found. He reportedly acted nervously when questioned about his whereabouts on the night of Asha's disappearance, but was never formally identified or charged. Unfortunately, by the time investigators were alerted to this lead, the man had moved out of state and was difficult to locate. Despite this setback, the discovery reinvigorated interest in the case. Investigators expanded their search for anyone connected to that man, but their efforts were met with silence or dead ends. Still, the hint of a possible link reminded everyone that the story of Asha's disappearance was far from settled. Around the same time, renewed media coverage